Okay guys, so last time when we talked, we were talking about how we have our file format for our level here, and we want to basically make it so we can store these levels online. So quite a few ways of doing this. I kind of am a big fan of using GraphQL for all my database needs. It's a layer in between the actual details of how the data is stored in the database and more about how you want to consume it in the app. So even though we have a very simple case now, it could be more complicated in the future. And we really don't know what we're used for a backing store in the long run. We have our level as a JSON document, so it seems logical that we would go to some kind of document database in the future, kind of a Mongo type thing, or one of the many equivalents. But sometimes it's easier just to use a SQL or something, so we'll just have to see. The main thing is to first make it so we can query this class. And so we're going to start by making a new server that is going to have a GraphQL endpoint in it that can generate these objects and respond to queries of them. So let's go ahead and get started. If you're not familiar with GraphQL, you can use Apollo. It's a really nice GraphQL package and just lives on top of Node. They also have very nice front ends for it in most of the popular front end kits, React, Angular, iOS, Android, so on. All right, so first thing we always want to do when we're making a new project is actually make the project. We want to start with this in source control, so let's go ahead and make a new repository here. And we'll just save this under our thing here, and we'll call it What the Flock server, because it will be the server for the What the Flock. We can stick in a git ignore here to start us off. We know that we'll be using Node, so we can get that, and we won't worry about the license for now. So this should create it really quick, and then we're ready to go. We have an initial check-in, and we can publish it. You can also make it public or private. Now that GitHub is free for private, you can kind of choose what you want to do. Usually make these things public in the long run, but we can always change it later. And we publish it. So now that we have this thing published, this actually lives in our file system here. So we can see what files are there. We can open up, change stuff, see what the history was. Not much exciting in there right now, but we can show this in the Explorer. We could open Visual Studio and start doing some coding. So pretty boring right now. So why don't we go ahead and start adding some code to this thing. So everybody has their own personal development environment. Some people like Visual Studio Code a lot these days. I'm still kind of a fan of IntelliJ, so I think I might start by using that. And what we need to do is first install Node here and initialize that. And then once we have Node installed, we can install the GraphQL server. So while this is loading, this is a good time to familiarize ourselves, if we haven't done it before, of what that server looks like. So let's take a peek here. I have the GraphQL server page up. Always good to remind yourself how to do these things and look at them. And no one can ever remember it, and you don't have to because it's all online now. So we can see here, just on their docs page, it's pretty straightforward. You know, the usual init npm, install some dependencies, create an index.js, and then we're pretty much done. So that sounds straightforward. We can actually just do that in the terminal program. So if we can remember where we put our project, it's always confusing when we're switching between these things. If you especially go between Windows and Mac or another Linux-based system. I often do this, I'll type ls when that's not going to work. You can use PowerShell if you want, but that's okay. One thing at a time. I believe we made this in our Unity folder, and we're doing this in the Create with Code folder. And if we look in there, we should start to see our What the Flock server. So now this directory is basically empty. So let's go ahead and we can see, by the way, that IntelliJ has loaded in the background. Let's go ahead and get this going. And what I do is a lot of times just keep the window in the background, make sure that I've gotten everything done correctly before we go and make a new file in IntelliJ. So let's go back to that page, make sure we're all doing good, go back to the command prompt, and we can just kind of follow along step by step. You can copy and paste things if you want, but in this case, it's pretty easy, so no need to get crazy with that. So npm init basically installs Node Package Manager, and inits a new project that's going to use it. This is kind of like watching paint dry here, but shouldn't take too long. And we're done. And we got an error, but that's okay. We have no test yet. Once we have Node, we can install dependencies. And that's just done by doing npm install. We'll install the server, and we'll install GraphQL. Eventually we'll probably install something to talk to whatever database we end up using, but we can always do that later. This will fetch the latest and pull those down. And once it's done, we have to create an index.js file for it. Pretty exciting here. All right, so now if I look what's here, it's starting to get the node modules there, has the package lock file, so we're looking good. Let's make index.js. Oh, that's right, touch doesn't work on Windows, that's okay. So now is a good time for us to go back to IntelliJ here, and let's just open up that project in IntelliJ. So we can see we have a ton of files here, but let's go into Unity, our Create with Code project, and then we're going to open up our WTF server. Let's keep this window, so we'll make a new window for it. I usually like to keep a bunch of windows open for the projects because I copy and paste between them quite a bit. So now here I can see my files, and now I can go ahead and create that index.js file that we wanted. This is a little bit weird. Not sure why this is underneath there. Oh, you know what? We actually made this in the wrong place. Interesting. That's okay. Looks like we have a mismatch between where we made this thing in GitHub and where we just made it with our code. So let's go unwind that, shall we? We'll quit out of this. And if I go to my file system here, and I go look at my code folder, I'll show you what happened. So when I created the WTF server, it actually created another subfolder underneath it. And the actual Git that we're doing is inside here. So what we want to do is either move the Git up here to this folder, or we can move the node modules into the other folder, but we don't need both. So what we'll do now, though, just to kind of keep things simple, is let's go ahead and delete this one here, and we'll rehome it. So what's going to happen now, you'll see, is if I go into my GitHub, you'll see that it cannot find it. And now let's tell it to locate it. And we can even say clone it again. For that, we'll put it in the same location. That was actually not what I wanted. I thought maybe it would ask me for where it would put it. Let's delete that. And now let's say locate this. Ooh, yes, it won't let me do it in an empty folder. Well, this is taking much longer than we had hoped. Let's go back and we will deal with this in a bit. Let's go back to create with code. We're going to completely delete this. And let's go ahead and start again here. So that's looking better now. We don't have that mysterious second folder in there. And we can go back to our terminal and execute the same commands that we did before. We're going to init node. We are going to install those packages. Meanwhile, while this is installing, we can go back and open that folder now again in IntelliJ. Open in a new window. And now it's looking a little bit better here. So let's go ahead and add that new file we wanted, which was a JavaScript file, index.js. And we will add it into Git, and everything should be working, back to working correctly. Very exciting. So then we have some very, very simple test code here, just to make sure things are working. And basically the way GraphQL works is you have a graph description, basically a description of your data, which is the structure that the data has, and that's separately from the resolvers that actually fetch the data from the back end. So you can make a query with any type of data that you want, and it will figure out what calls it has to make to do it, even if these properties on objects are coming from different databases or have a different format. You can do all that conversion there and hide that from the thing. So basically what we're going to do here is we're first going to take this code and paste it in, and this code is defining the query that we have here, what they call the schema. So we have an object of type book that has a title and an author, and we have a single type of query that can return an array of books. Then we're going to give it some sample data of what those books are. And finally, we're going to define a resolver. And again, the resolver is the thing that, given a query, fetches the data and returns it. So again, here we have an extremely simple resolver. It's just saying, hey, when somebody asks for books, return books. So no database, nothing. Don't get much more basic than that. And then to actually make this thing work, we of course have to instantiate the server. So in here, we have a new Apollo server, and you give it the queries definitions and the resolvers, because you can have many of both of them in GraphQL. And then we start the server. Basically, we just listen for it and let her go. So once that's working, we should be able to actually run this and see how it goes. So let's go to our terminal here, and if we just do node, we should be ready to go. So there's our terminal. And this is just basically just like using the command line, so it has all the same things. So here I can say start node. It'll sit here for a second, and then it says, hey, we're ready to go at localhost. So if I fire up localhost and take a look at that page, I'm going to get this GraphQL playground, which is really cool. This is something that comes with the Apollo GraphQL, and I can actually start doing queries against it right now. And because the schema in GraphQL is inspectable, I can always see exactly what the schema is. So I can see I have a type of query called book, and I can tell what my book is, and so on. So if I want to issue that query, I can just start typing here and say, hey, this is my query of my books, and for my book, I want to know the title, let's just say. And so this will tell me for every book what the title is. And if I want the title and the author, I can do that. And if I only need the author, I can do that, and so on. So now that we have this basically running, now in the next episode, we are going to make this match our data model. So tune in a bit.